We're now going to discuss the solution to exercise 3-15 on page 118. In this problem, we deal with the Diewold Company, which has two departments, a milling department and an assembly department. The company uses job order costing and computes a predetermined overhead rate for each department. The milling department bases its rate on machine hours, which is not too surprising as milling department is heavily run by machines, and the assembly department bases its rate on direct labor hours, as you'd expect a lot of laborers within that department. At the beginning of the year, the company made the following estimates for labor hours, machine hours, fixed manufacturing overhead cost, as well as variable overhead per machine hour and per direct labor hour in each of the departments, milling and assembly. What they want us to do is compute the predetermined overhead rate to be used in each department. So that's the first thing we need to do, and that will take us a little bit of effort. Alright, as we saw in the last problem, we were given the fixed manufacturing overhead. Alright, in exercise 312, we're also done the same thing here. And then we're given the variable overhead rate per machine hour for the milling department, per direct labor hour for the assembly department. So first thing we need to do in order to calculate this predetermined overhead rate is come up with what the estimated total manufacturing overhead cost would be. Our estimated fixed manufacturing overhead is $390,000. We estimate our variable overhead to be $2 per machine hour. And we have 60,000 machine hours we expect in the milling department. All of this material is right out of the book in that table, right in the middle of the page. Therefore, we anticipate $120,000 of estimated variable manufacturing overhead. Added to the $390,000 of fixed manufacturing overhead, our estimated total manufacturing overhead cost, $510,000. Based on an estimated manufacturing overhead cost of $510,000, and given that our overhead is driven by machine hours within the milling department, we therefore take the $510,000 of total manufacturing overhead estimated divided by our estimated total machine hours of 60,000 to come up with a predetermined overhead rate of $8.50 per machine hour in the milling department. We next do the same thing for the assembly department. The only thing that's different here is that instead of using machine hours as a driver, we're going to use labor hours. Our estimated fixed manufacturing overhead in the assembly department is $500,000. Our estimated variable manufacturing overhead is $3.75 per direct labor hour. We have 80,000 direct labor hours. Therefore, $3.75 multiplied by 80,000 direct labor hours is what we expect. This is our estimate. We expect to have $300,000 of variable manufacturing overhead. Added to our estimated fixed manufacturing overhead of $500,000, our estimated total manufacturing overhead is estimated to be $800,000. Therefore, the predetermined overhead rate for the assembly department will be the $800,000 of estimated total manufacturing overhead divided by the 80,000 estimated direct labor hours to give us a predetermined overhead rate of $10 per direct labor hour. Once we have our predetermined overhead rates, we can go to Part 2. Part 2 wants us to calculate the estimated manufacturing overhead cost for job number 407. And in that second table, all the way at the bottom of page 118, we are given direct labor hours for the milling department and assembly department, machine hours for each department, materials requisition for each department, and direct labor cost for each department. Given that, what we need to do is calculate the total direct materials for both departments, the total direct labor for both departments, and the total overhead, which we would take the overhead for the machine milling department and the overhead for the assembly department and add them together. So let's first tackle the direct materials. Our direct materials will be the materials requisitioned as given in the table: $800 from the milling department, $370 from the assembly department. So total direct materials, $1,170. Our direct labor will be the $45 from the milling department, $160 from the assembly department. Our total labor will be $205. We will then need to allocate overhead. In the milling department, if you recall, it's based on machine hours. There are 90 machine hours in the milling department. Our predetermined overhead rate is $8.50 per machine hour, as we calculated in Part 1. Therefore, we will allocate 765 hours of manufacturing overhead from the milling department. In the assembly department, we allocate overhead based on direct labor hours. We have 20 direct labor hours in the assembly department. Our predetermined overhead rate in the assembly department is $10 per direct labor hour. Therefore, our total allocated overhead from the assembly department is $200. When we add the overhead together, we get $965 of overhead will be assigned to job number 407, the 765 plus the 200. Overall, our total manufacturing cost will be $2,340, which is the $1,170 of materials, the $205 of labor, the $965 of overhead. All told, manufacturing overhead or manufacturing total cost for job number 407, $2,340. Part 3 asks, would you expect substantially different amounts of overhead costs to be charged as some jobs if the company used a plant-wide overhead rate based on direct labor hours instead of using departmental rates? They want us to explain. As you can see in the solution manual, obviously you'd expect some. When you use just one allocation factor, you're going to be painting the picture with a broader brush. Therefore, you're not going to be as specific, and therefore you're going to have a little bit of a difference. So if some jobs require a large amount of machine hours and a small amount of labor time, they would be charged less overhead cost if a plant-wide rate was based on direct labor hours were used. This does it for our discussion of solution to exercise 3-15.